week, the markets plummet after a draft CAG report slams the government for not auctioning coal blocks, resulting in a loss of 10.7 lakh crore rupees to the exchequer. Find out what this means for your stock investments. Prakash Diwan picks MCX, India and Hindalco remedies as smart investment options for you. We'll find out why. And with the merger with Tech Mahindra, find out what you should be doing with your Mahindra Satyam stock. Welcome to All About Stocks on ET Now. Thanks for joining us this weekend. We've had quite a week on the market. This is the show where we'll decipher all of that information for you. We'll tell you how it will affect your investments, and we'll tell you if you should be making any changes. Remember, all the calls you hear on this show are for a 3 to 4 year horizon, not shorter than that. There's an email ID at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to write to us if you have any questions about your equity investments. You can also reach us on our Facebook page as well. All right, before I start talking about your equity investments, it's important for us to find out what happened in the markets this week. My colleague Navneet is here with the latest details. Navneet.
Well, it was a very volatile week for the markets. If you look at the benchmark indices, Sensex was down by 0.6%, whereas Nifty was down by 0.7%. And look at the broader market, BSE Mid-Cap Index was just marginally down by 0.1%. And if you look at the Small Cap Index, that was down by as much as over 1%. And looking at some of the index gainers, clearly it was the defensives which managed to stay firm during the week. So you had Sun Pharma, which was up by about 6.7%. HUL2 was up by just close to 3%. And Hero MotoCorp was too up in trade by over 3% for the week. And among the index losers, it was JS Steel and Reliance Power. Clearly, these counters reacted sharply to the CAG report, which came to both the counters were down by over 6%. Hindalco too was down by about 6.6%, and IDFC was down by about 6.8%. And if you have a look at the mid-cap gainers, it was clearly TTK Prestige and Century Textiles, which were the stocks during the week. TTK gaining about 14% and Century up by 16%. Bata was too up by about 13% for the week. And among the mid-cap losers, it was Manappuram Finance, which was down by about 19%, and NVL2 was down by 17%.
Right, Navneet, the big story, obviously, for this week was that CAG report that was leaked to the Times of India on coal mines. Could you tell us what the reaction was in the market to that report?
Well, you had Times of India report on CAG, which was on coal mining, shook the markets on Thursday. So that was really the story of the week, where you had counters like JSPL, Reliance Power, Bhushan Power, Adani Group. These stocks clearly reacted to this particular news, which actually stated that 155 coal blocks were given to commercial entities without any auction between 2004 to 2009. And these coal blocks were beneficiaries. These among the coal blocks which were allocated to the companies, out of which it was 100 private companies, and the remaining coal blocks were given to the PSUs, and most of the coal blocks were allotted to power, steel and the cement companies. So you did have a whole lot of these stocks which reacted sharply to the news. In the end, we did get some clarification from the CAG, which sent its report to PMO stating that it was just at its nascent stage and it was not the final report on the coal mining scam.
All right, Navneet, thanks for that information. Now, joining us to help us make sense of all of the information Navneet just gave us is Prakash Diwan of Asit C. Mehta Investments. Prakash, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. The big story, like Navneet was telling us, was that CAG report on the allotment of coal mines. Now, we know the CAG has clarified that the leaked report was only an initial draft. But at that point, do you think investors should be worrying about the final report, or do you think it's too premature? Does it have the potential to do more damage than the 2G scam?
It's not a case of allegations coming out from the CAG report. All that the CAG report actually alludes to is a particular way, a particular pattern of the policy of allotting coal licenses for these coal mines was probably not the best in the country's interest. And if they were to be auctioned, they would have fetched a much better price and much better money to the exchequer. So here we are not talking about somebody misusing authority or power to do something against the policy, but we are talking about the policy itself being flawed. So in that sense, I don't think it could have such a long-term damage. It could ruffle some feathers in the beginning, but once those things settle down, clarifications come through, you'll realize that it is not such a bad thing after all.
I want to ask for your advice on the power sector in particular? We know it's had its list of issues. We know the Prime Minister's office is looking into shortage of coal for the sector. What is your advice to investors right now? Would you recommend they hold on to their power stocks, or do you think that it's too volatile a sector for a retail investor to be in at this moment?
What makes sense for investors is to keep a watch on a couple of other things than just the coal supply part. There's a big issue in the overhang of the competitive pressure which you have from the Chinese makers of BTG boiler turbine and generator sets. So if that were to there's some positive change from the government side on that, that would be a very big fillip. And the third thing is the SEB restructuring and the financial part of the power sector. If that also sees some sort of a streamlining, some steps taken in that direction, it will be a positive. And just all of these would take place gradually, so it will give ample time for investors to actually get into the right stocks within the sector on the backdrop of all positive announcements.
Could you name a couple of stocks in the power sector that you find interesting at this point for a retail investor, long-term horizon?
My top pick is Tata Power. This is a company which has set up some very large projects, the maximum number of UMPP megawattages with them. Adani is the other one which would benefit out of this. And you have some of the smaller ones like Lanco, which also have a huge capacity build up and depending on coal for a large part of the business. So in that order, Tata Power, Adani Power, Lanco would be the best bets to look at.
And since we are talking about coal, we also should be talking about India's largest coal supplier. Coal India, what's your call on it for a retail investor for the long-term horizon, given everything that we've seen happen in that sector over the last month or so?
That's true. Coal has been making more news than coal actually, and that should change given the fact that now things have come to a head where a lot of favorable legislation would have to come through, a lot of changes would have to come through, and all of that, mind you, augurs well for Coal India because it also needs clarity in terms of how does it go about expanding its business and allocating its existing resources. So it's a positive for Coal India, and in the medium to long term, it's a must-have in the portfolio. I don't think any investor can avoid having Coal India in the portfolio. Primarily, whenever you have dips in Coal India, buy into it.
Let's move on now to our portfolio segment. Every week, we pick the portfolio of one lucky viewer, and our guest takes a look at your entire portfolio and tells you what you should be changing, if at all. Now, this week, Yash is that lucky viewer. He sent out a list of the stocks that he has invested in. Prakash, he has 15 shares of Bharti Airtel, which he bought at 350 rupees. He has 14 shares of Aban Offshore, which he bought at 501. And he has 100 shares of Manappuram Finance, which he bought at 50 rupees. I'm going to start at the bottom with Manappuram Finance. Now, those RBI regulations will, of course, hit margins of gold loan companies. We know that there is a view that lower interest rates in the horizon would open up other debt options for borrowers who may not be looking at gold, loan against gold anymore. What's your view on Manappuram Finance right now?
No, I would definitely book profits. This is a stock that's run up and has had an amazingly secular uptrend for the last quite some time. I mean, so many quarters actually. And you don't see that in markets which are so uncertain and volatile. But this is one stock that has delivered returns. But it's time that you realize these stock runs also, these bull runs also have a peaking of sorts. Not only is the RBI intervention that's changing the dynamics of this business, and as you rightly said, the low interest rate regime would be very different, but gold itself could correct quite a bit given the strength. The dollar is, of late accumulating. And I think if that happens, all these companies could be in for a severe hit. So before that happens, I think it makes sense to book profits.
What about Bharti Airtel? Been on the positive side of the news of late. He bought it at 350. What's your long-term view on that stock?
So Bharti has been a bit of in a range-bound behavior of sorts for quite some time. But if you understand, the telecom sector itself is going through a lot of changes that the government is trying to implement after it's got over the 2G issues. Primarily, Bharti would be in a very different zone, and that would be about 415 to 435 in the next couple of quarters, maybe hopefully. If everything goes off well on the 3G expansion that it has shared, but it has not started seeing some revenues out of that. So the kind of build-up in subscription that it saw in the month of Feb, I think is a very positive sign, and Bharti would benefit from that. So my sense is Bharti is a good pick in the portfolio. Keep it with you. Wait for another couple of quarters at least. And once that 400 plus mark gets achieved, you'll probably see it riding all the way to 435.
All right, and 14 shares of Aban Offshore bought at 501 rupees. Do you think that Aban can retest those levels of 650, 700 again that we saw last year? Or is it time for him to maybe hook out of that stock?
Fundamentally speaking, it still has a lot of overseas borrowing, the commercial ECB borrowings that it had made at significant cost. Now, every dip in the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar makes things difficult for Aban. And, even the oil business itself is not something that Aban has been able to make the most out of, given the kind of issues in pricing that we see. Oil itself as a commodity is fairly volatile, and Aban has really not been able to make the most of it. So my sense is, if he's happy with what he is getting right now, he could take it off the table, buy into some other stock, and then probably he'll be better off and much more at peace, rather than keeping Aban on the portfolio.
Right, so booking out of Manappuram and Aban Offshore and holding on to Bharti Airtel, would you recommend a couple of other stocks he can add to that portfolio right now for a long-term view?
For an exit from Manappuram, he could probably look at an M&M Financial Services or maybe an L&T Finance Holding. It's one of my all-time favorites. It's done pretty well. It's been resilient enough. It's got into home finance as well, which should open up a very large scale of business for them. You could look at that. For Aban, maybe you could switch into something in a similar price band, possibly maybe Britannia. Of course, it's not the same sector, but Britannia is also broken out into a new zone. The new launches that the company has made, the new addition to the portfolio in terms of the Nutri-Choice range, some of the cheeses that they have recently launched have done very well to move them from the biscuit side of the business, which is low margin. And I think Britannia is up for a very promising growth from here on. So we could probably look at switching into that.
All right, yes, we hope that helps. Now, Prakash telling you to hang on to your Bharti Airtel stock. Maybe add L&T Finance, M&M Finance, and of course Britannia to that portfolio. Right back to us if you need any more help. Remember, you can send us your entire equity portfolio. It will be our pleasure to look at it on this show. There's an email ID at the bottom of your screen. On the other side of this break, Prakash is going to stay with us. We will talk about MCX and what that stock could mean for your portfolio in the long term. Stay with us.